Hey, what's going on YouTube? Long time no see. I am not dead, which is great, at least, for me anyway. Yeah, so sorry about the huge lull in content or whatever. I have just, obviously there's a ton of stuff that I could discuss, that I want to discuss. AMD's kind of doubling of their density on 7 nanometer, putting twice as many cores in the same number, the same basically area on a piece of silicon is huge. Well, it's actually tiny, but it's huge for us. And it means we're probably going to get 16 core, 32 thread, AM4 Zen 2 parts here in like Q1 2019. That's amazing. Up to 64 cores on the high-end desktop, 128 threads is absolutely insane. People doing high-end desktop work, that's going to be just absolutely bonkers. You've also got double the floating point, calculations. So double of, number of cores, double the floating point. Math is going to be massive. You got iPhones exploding. You got, NVIDIA is really struggling right now. Their stocks are down. To be fair, all the major tech stocks are down. And that is really actually the kind of meat and potatoes of this video. Obviously, you can look at the title and see, but there's a lot more stuff that I want to cover that I will get to eventually. But for this video, I just want to talk about how dead that RTX is. RTX is dead on arrival, it's dead in the water, and it looks to be dead in the future as well, and I'm going to tell you guys why. I think a lot of you guys already know that it's dead on arrival, or it was on arrival, and there's still no content out there that takes advantage of half of the silicon, on these new RTX GPUs that's allocated for RT cores, ray tracing cores, or for their tensor cores that are supposed to provide some kind of a, really nice anti-aliasing solution or whatever. But yeah, I did a video probably 2 weeks ago, didn't release it, happens all the time, but it was how RTX could live or how RTX could die. And I recorded another video, and it was like 40 minutes long, so I'm going to try and make this one shorter, but I didn't want to spitball you guys for 40 minutes just about how RTX is dead. So I'm going to try and squeeze it into a shorter period of time for you guys. But let's get right down to it. So, as you guys know, RTX cards are out. The 2000 series NVIDIA GPUs are out. And they are expensive. And their performance in traditionally rasterized games, aka every single game that exists today, there are literally 0 games out there that support either exclusive feature, if you will, for the 2000 series right now. The Tensor Core really is intended for deep learning. I think DLSS is actually deep learning, super sampling, something like that. So it really is intended for like high-end desktop environments, data center environments where deep learning is actually relevant. And their RT cores are obviously for ray tracing, and they're not in any games. And that is basically 2 months after the product launch. Supposed to be in Tomb Raider, didn't pan out. Supposed to be in Battlefield 5. That has been released. It's not in that title either. It's not even in any indie titles. NVIDIA in the past has thrown money at people with GameWorks to implement certain proprietary features, enable those in their games or whatever, and they can't even do that. Developers really are just not incentivized enough, or it is, I'm imagining, NVIDIA is trying to throw as much money as they can at them, so that's not probably not the problem. It's probably an issue of implementation. The tool sets either are not mature enough, which is crazy because you've got to think NVIDIA's had, developers working with this stuff for the past year at least, trying to get this stuff implemented into their games as they went through their development cycle for this, the new Turing hardware. and they've kept game developers privy to this information and given them the tools ahead of time, and we still don't have anything. So you're talking about not just 2 months, but realistically probably over a year. Developers have had this at least knowledge and some kind of development tools, or something to try to prepare to get this stuff implemented in their games, and not a single title was available on launch, which is just, that's a slap in the face to consumers, especially those people who pre-order the product, to not have anything, not a single, not a demo, for God's sakes. You can't even download like Firestrike and show off ray tracing or their super sampling, whatever, and that's just a slap in the face to consumers who are spending $1,500 on a 2080 Ti, or $1,000 on a 2080, or whatever it is for a 2070. But to not have anything to show to your friends other than say, hey, look, I get some more frames per second with a 2080 Ti, which is $1,500 than the previous generation. It looks exactly the same. There's nothing I can show you that looks any different. But can you notice it looks better at 300 frames a second than it did at 240? Wow. Or if you're really shooting for just, I guess, higher performance 4K, the 2080 Ti really does shine there. So those are two kind of instances for that, an argument, I guess, for that one particular piece of hardware. But for $1,500, you're talking about spending a disproportionate amount of money for your return on investment currently, and I believe in the future as well, as I'll explain to you guys now. So, as I've said, they've had a long time, developers had to get this stuff implemented in their titles. They have not done so. NVIDIA probably has thrown them money, has probably provided them with tools, and we still haven't seen this, even in an indie game or a demo or a benchmark or anything. It's not available. Even the curated content that NVIDIA has shown, like Shadow of the Tomb Raider with RTX on versus it off, I personally couldn't tell a big difference. I'm a graphics whore. It looked very, very similar. You've got games like Red Dead Redemption 2, which is on consoles, for God's sakes, implementing lighting tricks that are very similar to what you would see on the screen if you were to implement, some form of ray tracing. And also titles are coming out to PC, like Hitman 2. You've got, accurate reflections on surfaces like mirrors, etc., using, different tricks that developers have had access to and are creating, etc., with more and more powerful GPUs, and as they get better, just utilizing traditional, GPU hardware. It doesn't matter if it's ray tracing or some other way of achieving the exact same look. If you were to go and buy a generic Ferrari and it looks the same, it performs way better, drives way faster and handles better or whatever than the real Ferrari, and you paid a tenth of the price for it, then that's a win for the guy who got the generic Ferrari, in my opinion. And the same goes for graphics cards and games. Even if they get RTX working in the future, let's say they get it working in Battlefield 5 eventually, or Tomb Raider eventually, we have nothing right now concrete to go on in terms of, hey, if you turn on DLSS, or if you turn on ray tracing, because again, there's not a single piece of software we can download to test this currently. But from what I've seen, and some of these leaks have to have some truth to them, is that I think I saw some numbers a while back where somebody had Battlefield 5 running on a 2080 Ti, a $1,500 graphics card, and they turned on ray tracing, and they turned off their frames per second, and they turned off their resolution. They were now playing the game just to enable slightly better lighting, and that's what it is. It's a mix of traditional rasterization lighting techniques and ray tracing. It's not full-on ray tracing. This is just some ray tracing being done in the game. Went from 4K and probably above 60 frames a second at ultra settings without ray tracing on, to 1080p 30 to 40 frames a second. You could VSync, lock that down to 30, and probably have some dips under that. You're talking about literally going into like $200 4-year-old base console PS4 territory type resolution and frame rates on a, God knows, $3,000 computer, $1,500 for the GPU alone. That is a slap in the face, and it makes the PC master race honestly look bad. No self-respecting PC master race, PC elitist is going to be on the forums talking trash to the console guys that are playing with an Xbox One X or even a PlayStation 4 Pro, with higher resolution than you're playing at on your new $1,500 GPU, saying, hey, I've got ray tracing and you guys don't. When again, there are titles out there implementing, newer lighting techniques that are enabling games to look like they have ray tracing without actually having to have the massive penalty to performance that ray tracing, assumedly will have on games. And again, there is no DLSS at this point. There's none of that deep learning, super sampling, or whatever anti-aliasing solution that nVidia has touted is coming for all these games. Nothing right now exists, and the reason it won't exist in the future, or that it will exist in a very, very minimal capacity, is again, the tools obviously suck. Or we would have seen this stuff in games already. The performance hits are obviously huge, or we would have seen them saying otherwise by now. And not to mention, rather, that AMD has come out and said, listen, we are not going to put ray tracing specific hardware on our GPUs, on any of our graphics products, until they can be in the entire portfolio of graphics products, which I think is a wise decision. NVIDIA is basically spending half of that space on their chips is going to waste. They've tried to push these new technologies on gamers that really, you can argue ray tracing, I guess if you would have filled the entire half, gotten rid of the tensor cores, okay, fine. You could have done some ray tracing, but it looks like it's hard as hell to implement, and it's going to just absolutely murder performance anyway. My opinion, they'd be better off just loading these things up with CUDA cores, shrinking them down, to 7 nanometers, and you'd have absolutely blistering performance. The 2070 would be performing like a 2080 Ti. The 2080 would be performing like a whole new generation of graphics cards. And the 2080 Ti, for God's sakes, if that entire die was all CUDA cores, the performance would be almost double what it is. I don't even know what the bottleneck would be there, whether it would be the, depending on your resolution and your settings, etc. It would probably be somewhere else in your system. It probably wouldn't even be the memory bandwidth. They're getting a ton of memory bandwidth out of that GDDR6, and the higher gigabits per second on those chips, as well as the higher bus interface, etc. So you probably have some other limiting factor in your system, but those cards would be absolutely monstrous. And that's what AMD is going to do. AMD, is going to build their next generation of gaming GPUs, rather, and they're not going to waste any space. They're going to put these things in consoles, which is where the money is, where developers are going to have to prioritize their development cycle, their time, and that's just because they're going to get a better return on their investment. They're going to make more money on a massive amount of players on console, PlayStation 5, the next generation of Xbox, that are going to be using all traditional, full-blown, the entire piece of silicon on traditional rendering. And as you've already seen, like I say, titles are already showing lighting similar to what ray tracing will look like. without the need for killing performance, without the need for dedicated hardware, etc. And if they can get an entire chip full of traditional rendering cores on 7 nanometer, they are going to absolutely murder any company, NVIDIA, Intel, whomever chooses to make a graphics product and takes half of it and basically throws it in the trash can and doesn't use it. No matter how good the other half of the chip is, no matter how good their CUDA cores are, how much better optimized they are than Pascal was, which Turing is, and especially in low-level API situations like DX12 and Vulkan, you're seeing their kind of asynchronous compute, which is still really, it's more of an emulation of asynchronous compute or whatever. But it's vastly improved over what Pascal did. So they have a great architecture with Turing. The CUDA cores in Turing are fantastic, but they should have released, for gamers anyway, fully, CUDA cores on Turing-based gaming consumer GPUs. And if you go in the data center where you're doing stuff, or the high-end desktop environment where you're doing stuff that can actually utilize that and is not a pain in the ass to do so, which it obviously is for game developers, then okay, fine, it makes sense. But NVIDIA took, I guess, the easy route and just said, okay, we're going to just keep stamping out the exact same GPUs and sell them to gaming consumers as well, try to force developers to implement this stuff into their games, and it has not worked out. And it won't work out because even if developers get paid by NVIDIA, they're just not going to spend a lot of time pushing this stuff into games when you've got your consoles, you've got the other 98% of the PC market that doesn't have RTX cards in their system. They're not going to cater to 1% or 2% of a very of the minority of the market anyway, relative to consoles. The PC, really a lot of their money coming in every month from game sales or whatever is subscription-based stuff like World of Warcraft and microtransactions and free-to-play games like Fortnite and PUBG and whatever. And a lot of people just, honestly, they pirate games on the PC. So the return on investment for developers is not as great as it is on console. And with AMD coming out and saying, we're not going to be doing what you guys are doing, we're going to let developers continue to be innovative with lighting techniques that work on traditional hardware, etc., is really, in my opinion, the final nail in the coffin for NVIDIA's RTX. And it's unfortunate because I think ray tracing is a cool technology, but it's not ready for prime time. And that's, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the lack of content, of any content. And I just don't feel like NVIDIA has gained, if anything, they've lost, faith from their consumers, especially those folks that went out and pre-ordered. I'm really sorry for you guys. Again, if you're someone who bought a 2080 Ti and you're happy getting higher frame rates, but it looks the same, great. But other than that, you could have bought a 1080 Ti in place of a 2080, and you'd be getting, roughly the same frame rates, considering most titles are still DX11 or whatever. And it's really made AMD competitive again in the lower end market with their RX, Polaris cards, their Vega cards, etc. They're very price competitive now. I think they do consume a little bit more power or whatever, but they're price competitive once again, as the 2000 series has kind of pushed the Pascal series down in price, not very much, and AMD's prices have really fallen. They've got the RX 590 coming out, and it's again on 12 nanometer, just like the Turing-based cards are. But when 7 nanometer hits, I really hope that NVIDIA takes the RT cores out, takes Tensor cores out, and re-releases products, or at least has choice for consumers to say, hey, do you just do you want ray tracing on your GPU cores on your GPU? Do you want tensor cores on your GPU? If they're not going to be features that are implemented in games, consumers are going to say, no, we don't. We'd rather have the entire chip, not half of it wasted, but the entire chip dedicated to making the games and the lighting and the whatever features those games are using actually run faster, as opposed to this, basically these empty promises and waiting on things that may never even happen. And if they do happen, you're talking about a very, very small percentage of games. And again, that's going to impact performance in a huge way, in a hugely negative way, and basically send you back down to console peasant level in terms of frame rate and resolution, just for some fancier lighting that again can be done on traditional hardware using certain tricks, and it's going to look very, very similar. So I guess if I'm wrong, if you guys know of any software that you can play right now, or that you've got hard evidence, say, hey, this is coming out. I have been hearing promises of hard evidence for a couple months now, for 6 months now, about when RTX is released, we're going to have all these games, and NVIDIA said we're going to have DLSS on these 20 games at launch, with more coming. And again, that number is still a big fat 0. So prove me wrong. If you think RTX has a great future, tell me why down below. I'd love to hear it. I'm actually glad. I'm glad NVIDIA did release the 2000 series of cards, the RTX cards. We hadn't had any new GPUs for 2 years. So I'm glad that they're pushing technology forward. That's great. I just wish that they would have gone about it a different way, and put dedicated hardware where it belongs. Really, again, in the data center, where things like deep learning, things like ray tracing in the high-end desktop environment, people are doing rendering, 3D modeling, stuff like that makes more sense. And someone's not going to really care about frames a second if they're rendering a 3D modeling scene that takes a certain amount of time. That gets accelerated. That's great for that environment, but it doesn't help out gamers for squat. It just hurts them. So again, my opinion, NVIDIA, scrap the RT cores, scrap the tensor cores off of your RTX products, release them with your very well optimized, new 2000 series CUDA cores, and we would see mind-blowing performance and value compared to what we have now across the entire product portfolio. And you guys would essentially just bury AMD, which right now is still kind of competitive with you guys. And actually, your previous generation of cards is in the same boat. They're what gamers are really buying right now, because again, there's no games, not even a demo, that supports what your new cards are offering. So, swallow your pride. Give developers a break. This is something that is obviously not easy for them to implement into their games. And, give consumers what they want. More speed, more power, and, I think that's the way to go. So I'm sorry to tell you guys, if you have an RTX card, if you're happy with it, cool, but they're really dead. They really are. RTX was dead on arrival, and it's dead. It's dead in the water. I don't see it going anywhere. If you guys disagree, put it down below. Tell me why. Otherwise, hope you're all doing fantastic out there, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.